I am Dr. Christina Mattis here on behalf of the California Department of Education, and it has been truly an honor to be not only part of the program committee, but also a board member here with CNCC. I have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing our panel today for Digital Navigators, Bridging the Broadband Divide in California. Our panel moderator is Brandie Nonnecke, and I will, without any further ado, turn it over to her. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. I am Brandie Nonnecke. I am the director of the Citrus Policy Lab headquartered at UC Berkeley. I'm also an associate research professor at the Goldman School of Public Policy and a faculty co-director at the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology at Berkeley Law. So today our panel will be talking about digital navigators, and I have to be honest here that I had no idea what a digital navigator was. And so I'll be your resident person who knows nothing and is going to ask a lot of questions. But at the end, about 15 minutes before we end, we'll open it up for Q&A. So our session is bringing together experts with deep expertise in actually what a digital navigator is to discuss opportunities and challenges faced by digital navigators in expanding broadband access across California. We're going to focus on the contributions of public libraries, higher education institutions, and other anchor institutions. Before I turn it over to the panel, I wanted to highlight a few things that the state of California has been doing. So the state of California recently released its draft digital equity plan. And according to that plan, well, I want to guess how many out of 5 residents, how many lack access to high-speed broadband, affordable internet service, and devices in training? How many out of 5 do you think lack access? 3? 1. 1 in 5. That's correct. 1 in 5. Because somebody here knows the plan like the back of her hand.
I shouldn't have answered.
No, that's perfect. Okay, so 1 in 5 residents lacks access to high-speed broadband, affordable internet service and devices, and the training and skills to use them. Now, of course, this is a task well suited for digital navigators. A digital navigator is someone who is trained to help people learn how to get online, use devices, and acquire digital skills. The Digital Equity Plan seeks to align and integrate human services to focus on outcomes and convenience for individuals and households. And in doing so, they have been strategic in identifying the ability to train existing social workers, health workers, educators, librarians, and other human community services workers to serve as digital navigators. Now, the state plans on launching a California Connect Core. Have any of you heard of this in the room? A few? Okay, that's great. Now, the California Connect Core will have a digital equity grant program to expand community-based digital navigation and digital inclusion programs. And the California Department of Technology will develop a grant program to achieve this goal. So I'm very excited to be joined today by my 3 colleagues here. To my left is Amy Hamblin, Policy Advisor at Next Gen Policy. Next to her is Tamara Broman, Senior IT Analyst at the Sacramento Public Library. And on the far end is Jarrid Keller, Deputy Director, Support Services, also at the Sacramento Public Library. So I'm going to just kick off a question for everybody. I gave a really short definition of what a digital navigator is, but I'm certain I missed a lot. So what is a digital navigator? What do they do?
So I'll go ahead and start off. So really what digital navigators is they are basically your entry point into learning those things that you didn't know that happen on the internet. Really, that's really the way we like to look at it. So California Public Libraries, right? So many of our users walk through our doors because they don't know what they need to know. And a lot of times it is, hey, I need help getting an email account. I need help getting access to the internet, right? And so what a digital navigator does is this is the person that basically helps you start where you don't know where to start and help you introduce to services you may not have known. Now, a little, digital navigators take many different forms. In some cases, it's an actual position that is dedicated in an organization, or as is at Sacramento Public Library, it is all employees. We have a slightly different model when it comes to digital navigation in that we don't actually have positions dedicated in every location, but it's the expectation of staff that they're able to help anybody and everybody who walks through the door for those basic fundamental questions.
And I'm going to interrupt.
Mhm.
Do the staff actually have the capacity to do that right now? Are
Well-
they overworked?
So, as we all know, the pandemic has created some very interesting situations for us. And like everybody else, we're just struggling to keep our doors open. We haven't quite been, Sacramento Public Library's example, we haven't been able to restore our hours to pre-pandemic because we're just trying to keep the doors open. However, I will say that staff do anything and everything they can do to be able to help that patron. So there's really is that sense of commitment and dedication by librarians and branches to help.
And then actually, I'll jump really quick to Tamara. Okay, talking about the role of staff in serving as these digital navigators, like, why is the public library not opening up positions for digital navigators to come on? Is it the resource constraints?
So some of it is resource constraints, but as Jarrid mentioned, we anticipate that all of our staff members can do that position. So we don't need to specify or spend money or carve out budget for digital navigators. We encourage our staff to be able to help anybody who comes in the building with whatever type of navigation that they might need. So that's why we do it the way that we do it. Because the public library, you're going to have people come in off the street that don't know what they don't know. And they'll come in and they want to sign up for a service and they need an email address. Well, there's a digital navigator, AKA a staff member, who will help them do that right then and there on the spot. So that's how we kind of handle that.
I have a provocative question. Could we release some of this to like a ChatGPT tool, a chatbot digital navigator that could help people?
Then they have to know how to use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we can make a really nice user interface. Like, how do I get an email? Let me walk you through it.
Yeah. So if I could dovetail a little bit off of what Tamara had said, so a little bit understanding California public libraries. In California, there's 184 library systems. So you're going to have 184 different models in how digital navigation is done and what form digital navigators take in all of our jurisdictions. So there's not necessarily one fits all solution. Sacramento, we're a very interesting library system. We're a joint powers authority that provide library services for seven jurisdictions, including cities and counties. And we're kind of a little microcosm of California. We have urban, rural, very, very, very rural and suburban areas. And we have 28 locations that cover service area of over 1,000 square miles. So having a digital navigator exclusively embedded in every location does not scale. So that's why we have the model where we have built the skill sets with our staff so that they're able to provide those skills. But I do love your chat GPT idea.
It might work. I don't know. Yeah, Amy, if we could, yes, you know this digital equity plan really well, right? I'm putting them on the hook here. It's about 90 pages.
Yeah, don't quote me on all of it.
Something, yeah. Let's hear. How's that strategy going?
Well, just to be clear, I didn't write the plan, so I have read it, and we submitted a public comment, as probably the library did as well on it. But if I can, just for 1 second, I just want to jump back to some of the comments about digital navigators, what they are, and what that looks like. Because we just heard from, the library, Sacramento Library, but also kind of libraries writ large about how they're taking a lot of different approaches to it. And I just wanted to jump in to say that there are also a lot of other providers who work in this space and offer digital navigation services. And so that I think just really kind of underscores your point that it takes many different forms and there are many different models. And going back to really kind of a definitional issue about what a digital navigator is. Certainly, I think we can all agree that there's someone who serves almost as a middleman and a broker who understands someone's needs, what they don't know, but what they need and where they're trying to go. What are their goals, right? And helps that person identify resources. And then depends on what your definition of a digital navigator is. At Next Gen Policy, we have a pilot program we're doing at Compton College, which is a community college, around digital navigators that trains community college students and deploys them in the community. And we could talk more about that. But we like to think that there's someone who is kind of a hand holder as well. And to your question about Chat GPT, I think that's where it really breaks down. Like, you need someone who can kind of read between the lines of what someone might really need. And sometimes, like I think my colleagues here just said, someone doesn't know exactly what it is. So it's a little bit of sussing out what they need, and reassuring them and doing that hand holding and helping them oftentimes with the enrollment process and all these things where people have a lot of lack of trust and to a certain extent, a lack of follow through. And I don't mean that in a negative or blaming way, but they have a lot going on. And so sometimes it takes someone who, it's almost like a social worker who's like following up with them, checking in and getting them the resources that they need. And just one final point, at Next Gen Policy, we've also been advocating for kind of an enhanced version of Digital Navigator, which is like half IT worker, half social worker. And so someone who can direct you to other resources, but sometimes can also directly answer basic IT questions and not have to necessarily refer you out.
That's great. And we've already talked about a few different models, right? Like just training staff in-house, but then also tapping into other talent pools like community college. I would love to hear what has worked well, but also what has not worked well and why.
So one of the things that we've recently started doing is, and it kind of goes to what you're talking about, is social work interns. And these are students at colleges in our local area that come to the central library downtown and work with the patrons there that need assistance with everything from digital access to housing services and different resources. So that is something I think that has worked, that we just recently started doing. And I think that's pretty helpful.
So to speak about historically things that have worked well and then things that haven't. So, back in the day, of course, when computers were first introduced and everybody was learning how to use Office applications, we did an incredible job of providing classes all the time for our community. And a lot of this was spurned on by the Gates Edge initiative, which people may be familiar with. That was basically establishing core technical competencies for public libraries throughout the United States. So all of us were really engrossed in that. We were all in. We had, Tech 101 classes. We had, learn how to use a mouse, learn how to use Office, Excel. And that was great. And right about 2015, 2016, it was that was like the time where it's almost like everybody thought, okay, we've just landed the plane on the aircraft carrier and, we've achieved all of our goals. And then we started looking at other initiatives in our communities. And so what worked well is when we did that, but what didn't work well is when we changed our positions and started focusing on other initiatives, we kind of let some of those things go. And as we all know, during the pandemic, we had a huge, portion of the population for the first time, they had to engage with technology in order to participate in that environment. And so we have been trying to play catch up to rebuild a lot of those classes and things that our community wanted. So kind of a double-edged sword for us.
Yeah, sure. And I'll speak both from our direct program experience with the Compton College Initiative, but also as a policy advisor, I study and talk to a lot of different people who run digital navigator programs in California, as well as across the United States. And so I'll speak to that as well. In terms of what works well, on that kind of social worker side of it, it's someone who really knows the community well and is from the community. And to that point, has the cultural competency, and also oftentimes the language skills. And this is actually another program that I know of that works in training refugees in the U.S. and in California in a specific community, and having them do outreach to other refugees in their community. And that has worked really well. And that really is, I think, changing how some people think of this and who fills these roles. So sometimes it's very specific to a community and understanding a very specific community and how you address those needs. And at the Compton College pilot, I think it's similar. The Compton College student body is pretty diverse. They're generally from the community, and so they provide a lot of insight in how to, do marketing and reach people where they're at, and what type of events we should be going to and making ourselves present.
Okay, so we've heard what's worked. What does not work? I think we often can learn a lot more from failures, right? So I want to hear some failures.
Well, you'd stare at me, Tamara, with the failures. No, just joking. Definitely, I shared a little bit about what happened with when we initially had instructional courses and then we stopped doing it. But definitely, one thing that has not worked is a one-size-fits-all model. Specifically, so we have 28 locations. We have 28 very unique locations, 28 very unique communities. And sometimes we have made the mistake of assuming that the community was at a certain level or not at a certain level. And the classes did not resonate, or the communications did not resonate on what type of help was needed or what services were offered. And so that is something that we've learned, that although we know our communities really well, if we take a one-size-fits-all model, it doesn't always work, especially when you're talking about issues of digital literacy, digital inclusion, digital equity.
Sure. I'll jump in here. So I think I'll pick up on a point, or kind of a similar point to what Jarrid was just saying, as far as what hasn't worked, as far as the one size fits all model. We're kind of along those lines. Sometimes you'll see digital navigator models that are all remote, like it's a remote helpline, or just in person, at a fixed location. And I think there are advantages to both, but things will break down because sometimes people have a very specific preference about how they want to be helped and served. And in some cases, it's in person. And part of it's an age thing, but there's a whole variety of reasons why someone would much prefer it in person. And sometimes it's, the opposite. And then I think the other thing that hasn't worked well is when you don't do a lot of marketing, which is always the case, where you create a solution and then you expect people to find it. And the whole point of digital navigators is that people don't know what they don't know, right? And so if you're not, even if you're doing some marketing, they might see it once and not know what it is and reach out. So we kind of taken that to heart. We're trying to do more and more marketing around what services we have, and then also just be really proactive in going out into the community and making ourselves available at places that people already go.
I mean, it sounds like the community plays a central role in this, like even just telling other people in the community about the program. How do you incentivize community members to become digital navigators?
For us, it's part of their job because they're librarians, library assistants. We expect them to be able to help the public with navigating our resources. As far as getting people from the outside in, we have the social work interns, and that's a very good experience for them. For us, it really is our staff that we have that is doing our digital navigation work.
Another thing is, and what I think might be unique to the library community, is we have what are called friends groups. And these are really lovers of our libraries and our library systems, and they help fundraise and they help promote awareness and they help get our message out to the community. So that's actually been very valuable for libraries in general.
Amy, how do you keep the students involved long term?
Well, we pay them. So that's a good first step. And we try to sometimes have food. We have t-shirts. No, I'm joking. Those are all things we do. But one of the things that we've heard from some of the students who participated in the first cohort, because we're now into our second cohort, is that for some of them, it was the first time that they felt like they really had an opportunity to give back to their community. And that was really meaningful to them, and also to see themselves in a different light as someone who's providing the help and the resources and kind of transitioning from being a student or someone who receives help and learning. So that's pretty cool to see. And then just more broadly, when it's possible, if you have an incentive, if you have a device or, anything like that, and you could pair it with this, I think that's been really helpful as ACP is basically almost over. Some of those concrete reasons why someone might engage with you are disappearing. And so I think that will be a challenge going forward.
All right, I have another question for the Sacramento Public Library.
Yes.
The two people in the end. Are you seeing over time more people using the library and its services?
You want to go and then I'll go. There we go.
I mean,
always
because
have
like
something to-
thinking about going online and being digital, I don't often step into a library anymore, right?
So before COVID happened, we had a lot of patrons come in and use our computers, and they usually had to reserve them ahead of time because they were constantly booked and just a lot going on with our public computers. Recently, we have noticed that it's more Wi-Fi. People are bringing their devices to the library more than they ever did before and just using our internet. They're not using our computers as much as they used to. So that's a change that we've seen.
Yeah, and what we've also seen too is that people are using the library differently post-COVID. And so we're being used differently in terms of a gathering space, but also we have seen the use of our materials change. Our physical circulation has gone down a little bit, but our e-resources and our electronic circulation has gone through the roof, which is very interesting. And a lot of that was prompted during the pandemic because people discovered how to use this in a different way. Unfortunately, one of the best kept secrets we have in library land are all of the online databases that we have for e-resources and online tutoring. The list goes on. And so we've seen a resurgence in those and people starting to discover them. It has also given us a great opportunity to help those who may not have known that we have that available. So it's been a change. So we're just seeing we're getting used differently. It's not necessarily that our numbers are down. In some cases, our door counts might be down in some ways, but in other ways, our usage is a lot higher. So it's really whatever this new normal is going to be. And I think, we're still trying to figure out what that is.
It's definitely gone digital for us more so than it used to be. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have stepped into a library, but really only to use the Wi-Fi. So I'm really curious about this digital equity plan and the money that's been allocated to support the development of digital navigators across the state. I have many questions. First, is there enough funding to actually be able to do this? Two, what's the plan? How do we train up people? I believe that there's a grant making process, right? But I'll let the expert.
I'll start this off. I'll have to be careful about who's in the audience because I actually just came from another panel. Maybe some of you were there. Jarrid actually introduced it on federal broadband grant programs. So a lot of this stuff is actually still pending, and there might be some experts in the room here who can jump in. But as far as kind of where the state is with the state digital equity plan, the draft has been released. The public comment period happened. So hopefully everyone who wanted to in this room was able to submit a comment. We're still waiting to see, or I'm waiting to see the final version. I think it's being approved by the federal government, by NTIA right now. And once that happens, that basically will unlock more federal funding. So there's two pots of funding that we'll be receiving in California. There's a capacity grant, which is going to be going to the state to basically help implement the state digital equity plan. And as far as I know, again, who knows if someone else is in the room here who can tell me otherwise, we don't know the exact amount California will be receiving. I think we can ballpark it. But we don't know the exact amount yet. But that should be forthcoming very shortly. And then on top of that, there's a competitive grant program also. And for that, we know the overall federal funding that's put toward that. I forget exactly how much, like 1.2, 1.3 billion for that. And I think 1.44 billion for the capacity grant, something along those lines. In the ballpark.
Okay. The state has been receiving billions of dollars, either federally or from state funds, for a long time now. When I was in grad school, I studied BTOP, the Broadband Technology Opportunities Program, also billions of dollars. Are we getting closer to closing the gap, the broadband inclusion gap? And the role of libraries is really important.
So at one point in time, the city of Sacramento gave us, was it 1,000 hotspots to hand out to city folks that lived within city limits, and the library was instrumental in getting those into the hands of people that did not have internet access. We also did the ECF, which probably people have heard of, where we had 800 hotspots that we check out to patrons that they get to bring home and use. But
And
those
what's
are returned.
ECF? So that
ECF is Electronic Connectivity Fund. It was
Emergency Connectivity Fund.
Emergency Connectivity. Thank you, Jarrid. Emergency Connectivity Fund that gave us money to purchase hotspots and service. We went with T-Mobile for 800 hotspots, and ECF is actually ending, I believe, the end of June or July. June. So we're going to face some struggles there because it's a very expensive program. So
it's still in operation right now. People have these hotspots, or was it?
They do have these hotspots. Yes, we have had some issues with our ECF funding and not getting our hotspots back once we distribute them to patrons. So that program was a little bit rough on us and still is a little bit rough on us. And it is changing due to the fact that ECF funding is ending.
So just kind of dovetail off what Tamara said, the challenges providing connectivity are very real. They're very real in Sacramento County. We have areas that we serve where where the library is basically the de facto provider because providers can't go in there. I have a little community of Cortland where there's 75 residents there who cannot get connectivity in their home. And so the library turns out being the place where they're all huddled around to get connectivity. So the struggle is very real, especially in the rural, but also in the urban and suburban areas. One thing that the pandemic showed is when budgets start going down, you start turning to other options. We have a hotspot lending program that has been incredibly successful. Unfortunately, we are going to have to start eliminating it because without subsidies, it is not sustainable for us. So, yes, there's a lot of affordable programs out there, but at the end of the day, if you have to make the decision whether or not to feed your children or spend $20 a month for an internet connection plan, there's some hard decisions to be made. And we've seen a lot of residents in our community have to make the decision not to pay that. And so they come to us, the library, for connectivity. And, I'm of the belief that the internet should just be a utility. I think we're kind of to that point where, we need to look at that as a nation, but, I'm sure some will agree and disagree with me. But, the connectivity struggle is still very real. I think we were in this kind of complacency, I think, little pre-pandemic where we thought, everything's great. Everybody's getting connected. We're really closing the gap. Then the pandemic hits. And then we kind of really see the real impact when, the economics of it, really play a portion. And
I think one of the silver linings of the pandemic was proposed changes to some of the federal funding. And remember E-rate, there was a discussion about changing E-rate to allow for funding for these hotspots. And I just did a quick Google search. It looks like the FCC is still looking into keeping that long term, which would hopefully then give out some of this funding.
Yeah, we are optimistic. Like I said, our program, we could never have enough hotspots. As Tamara said, we had an issue, and everybody who participated in the program had an issue with hotspots returning. But, there is really a need and people needed them. And so, we have a 6-week loan period and sometimes people needed them longer than that 6-week loan. And there was hundreds upon hundreds of holds on those devices. So yes, we would like to see these programs continue. They're very valuable to our communities.
How do you determine who gets a hotspot? Is it needs-based, and how do they demonstrate that?
No. So basically for Sacramento Public Library's model, it's treated like a book. So it's basically a first come, first serve. So you're able to reserve it on the catalog. In some cases, in some communities where in the rural areas, we have what are called lucky day. So it means it's an item that you can't find in the catalog. If you walk in, you find it, hey, it's your lucky day. You get to check it out. And so that was the only way that we could make it sustainable. And it's the way we can make it fair and equitable. But like I said, there are 184 different models out there in how this was done in California at public libraries.
Wow. So from the discussion today, I think some of the key points as I'm wrapping up, I hope that some people have some questions, because I would like to give the last about 15 minutes to the audience for questions. First, what I've heard is tying digital navigation to other services, like social and welfare services. Second, one size doesn't fit all, and there needs to be that flexibility. And then third, it has to be really community driven. And then let's say fourth, got to keep the funding coming and identify ways to promote sustainability of these programs. Did I miss anything?
I don't think you missed anything. I think that's a great wrap up of everything.
Great. And so we would like to turn it to the audience for questions. I don't know if is that mic hot?
Let's check. Is this on? All right, it's on. Hi, everybody. Emilio Perez. I work for the state legislature. And I wanted to ask a question about adoption of broadband services. The Sacramento Library mentioned that you were giving out hotspots. That's great. We know ACP is going to be expiring soon, so we'll probably see a drop off in the amount of people that have access to broadband services.
I'm going to interrupt really quickly, just to make sure that we all understand. If we use acronyms, please say them out. So what is ACP?
ACP stands for the Affordable Connectivity Program. So with the Affordable Connectivity Program expiring, we'll probably see a drop in people having access to home broadband service. One thing that I've been thinking about from a statewide perspective is how maybe California could fill the gap in that need. And we do have an existing program, which is the California Lifeline program. It provides a subsidy of about, I think it's like $24 a month for people's home phone service, which there's about 1 million people enrolled in California. I believe 90% of those use it for a cell phone, which comes with a data piece and a data package, 6 gigabytes. Some people use it for their hotspot. And on the topic of digital navigators, I'm wondering if your organizations have begun to think about how to increase the enrollment. I do think, Lifeline is an imperfect program, especially compared to ACP, which in California, I think ACP had like 3 million people enrolled. Lifeline only had like 1 million, right? I think ACP was more meeting people's needs, but at the same time, we do have a program on the table, and I'm wondering if you might be able to comment on that.
So for Sacramento Public Library, the social work interns that we have are most likely aware of that program, yes, and referencing it multiple times, I would imagine. We do have a lot of resources for our patrons that come in that are low income, and the librarians and the library assistants that work at our information desks and at our circulation desks are aware of where to find that list of resources. It's also, our website has a few tools on it, I believe, for that type of information. Jarrid?
No, I mean, Tamara, what you said was very good. Another thing I will say is, the Lifeline program, I do think it does need to evolve a little bit. I think there's also some opportunities for the California Teleconnect Fund to fund a little bit more in terms of connectivity as well. So I think as a state, we have many opportunities, but it's only going to work. We all have to start working together on this. And, a lot of times we're a little insular in our approaches to this, but this is great, really a great opportunity for all of us to come together and kind of united come up with a solution. Because there's a lot of pots of money out there, and there's a lot of different programs that do similar but slightly different things. And I think we have an opportunity to do some consolidation.
And you worked for the California legislature? Well,
Yes.
we'll have to chat, because we're doing an ACP briefing for legislative staff I think in like a week or two.
Yeah, we're reserving the room for you.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Well, I will see you there and we can chat offline in a few minutes. As far as Lifeline, I think since we're actually a part of CADE, the California Alliance for Digital Equity, you're putting me on the spot with all the acronyms right now, which is a broad coalition of organizations in California. I think we're still kind of figuring out exactly what we want to advocate for. I think that's certainly something we're thinking about. I think the big issue, and I think Brandie was getting to it, is the fiscal sustainability of a lot of these programs. If you're going to just take a subsidy approach, it gets really, really expensive really, really quickly. And California, finds it in itself in the budget situation it does right now. So I think it raises some questions that I think are beyond the scope of, I think, today's conversation, right? About whether broadband should be a utility or moving to some type of model, right? Where it's not just the federal or state government trying to pick up the tab, in the billions of dollars in California for it. But that's not to say that Lifeline is necessarily off the table.
Thank you.
We've got plenty of time for your questions. Jeff, thank you.
So Jeffrey Weekly, UC Santa Cruz. We're here in Monterey, and as it turns out, Monterey has the oldest public library in the state, and you can go see that just kind of southwest of downtown. And I happen to know, because of my work with the ACLU, that the library is really a hub for providing services to our unhoused population, or we call them our outdoor neighbors. And I'm wondering if you could talk about this idea of a digital navigator and equity and access for that population. Does your library provide those kinds of services?
Okay. So first of all, we treat all patrons the same. It doesn't matter if you're housed or you're unhoused. And so anybody and everybody who walks through the door of a public library is welcome. All that we ask is that we follow the rule of conduct and you have access to all the resources. So we don't really care what your socioeconomic background is. We provide services for anybody and everybody.
But are there things that population?
That is why we've employed social work interns to kind of help in that case. Their needs, I'm going to be honest with you, are really no different than anybody else who walks through the door. If it's help, putting together a resume, help getting a Google account, those are all pretty much the same. At least that's the way that we treat it. Some, like I said, there's going to be 184 different models out there, but that's the way that we treat it.
I'll just say for our Compton project, we haven't drilled down yet, gotten kind of that granular in terms of putting clients into buckets and tailoring services. And that's maybe a direction we'd like to go. And in the case of some of the students, we know that there's large numbers of college students, community college students, and otherwise who are unhoused. So we know that that's a reality. We serve the broader community as well beyond just the campus community. But no, we haven't gotten there yet, but I think it's a good direction to go in.
Great, thank you. Any other audience questions? Nope. I thought I saw a tumbleweed go across the back of the room there, but actually I have one less. Sorry, I can't see. Yeah, you can ask one more, and then I have a final question for them, but I would prefer to give it to you.
Yeah, and this is just, I'll ask a question on the digital navigator piece. We will be expecting some money from NTIA for the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program. Based on my calculations, if you look at what we got for the planning grant, it might look like California's share could be around $100 million over 5 years. And one thing I've been thinking about is just sort of the structure of how some of this money is given out, right? Typically, we look at two agencies in California when we look at administering funds, the PUC and the Department of Technology. But I'm wondering, particularly around the piece of digital navigators. Do you think that some of these programs, is there a benefit to having them administered more as a local level, maybe like perhaps through a block grant where the state gives money to counties to do this kind of work at the local level, especially considering, like you said, one of the lessons learned is it's not one size fits all. And oftentimes when we do programs at a state level, it does tend to be more in that line of thinking of a one size fits all approach.
So definitely for public libraries, the local level works a lot better because we are locally funded. We reflect our communities. So I think it would be much more effective. It was at the local level as opposed to the state.
I'll chime in, actually kind of going in the other direction, not to discount that perspective. But one thing that I didn't really talk much about here is that we're interested in scaling up some of the digital navigator work, and kind of a similar model that we've been doing at Compton College, kind of taking it in the other direction. As much as we've talked about localizing this, we do see some value in creating kind of a shared framework and curriculum and all of that, and doing that through participating community colleges and working through the Foundation for California Community Colleges. And don't want to get into all the details, but that's something that's kind of on the table. But I think we do share, I think, maybe what you're getting at in terms of who's best placed to administer that, and making sure that those resources go to where they're most needed.
Do you have another question?
No, no, I don't. I was going to say I wasn't getting at anything. I asked these questions because I'm genuinely curious to hear from the people who are the closest to, the issue, especially working at a policy level in Sacramento. Don't always get to see the on the ground impact. So appreciate the panel. Thank you for participating.
Thank you so much for your question. So we have 3 minutes left, which means 1 minute for each of you to tell me if you had the perfect situation where you had everything you needed to achieve your digital navigator dream, what's the one thing that you would want?
Well, okay, with only now 2 minutes left, so I will quickly say something. So definitely, I think with what we would want is as many partnerships as possible to make things happen. So partnerships are critical.
I like that.
So if money was no object, then we would want to put a navigator at each one of our branches, and we would love to have them do outreach when we are stopping by different places. It would be wonderful to have somebody with us that can just dedicate themselves to that. So if money was no object, we would have a bunch of them helping us out.
All right. So maybe partnerships, outreach where money's not an option, individuals. Okay.
And I guess it's a variation on what Jarrid said, which I would say partnerships, but kind of along those lines, integration. So there's really a patchwork, I think, of services, both for digital navigators, but just social services in general. And I think that's a really missed opportunity. And so making sure that all these things are kind of synced up.
Great. Well, thank you so much. And I imagine there are a lot of those potential partners here in this room. So I hope that you will find our great panelists and connect with them today so that we can help support greater digital inclusion across the state of California. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel.